Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. You know, you don't know this listening one episode a week, but I record these things in batches frequently. So today I've had 3 interviews and 2 of them totally align in this really cool synergistic way. And I don't even know which one I'm going to release first. So I don't know if you're hearing this one first or second. But anyway, I interviewed somebody this morning about sort of body image and body kindness and recovering from the horrendous messages we've gotten and the self-criticism and body concerns that we have in our culture. And then this episode, I talked to Jennifer Gunsaullis, who has a new book out called From Madness to Mindfulness, about the kind of sexual madness we have gotten from the messages in our culture. You know, so body image issues are part of it. Shame and embarrassment and guilt and things like that are part of it. So we have been trained with these messages that create this sort of madness, wondering if we're broken and, this inability to show up and really connect with our sexual partner. And then her book is about using a mindfulness practice, really very concrete steps to lean into those things, learn more about them, and basically dissipate them, befriend your demons, and then they lose their power. Anyway, they go hand in hand really well. So today's episode is this whole going from madness to mindfulness, using these mindful techniques, this sort of applied mindfulness, to take apart the things that have us stuck in our sexual relationship, whether that's body image issues, whether that's shame, whether that's difficulty knowing what we want or asking for it, on and on and on. So I hope you enjoy the show. So Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. I'm excited to dive in.
I know I'm excited to capture your book release energy because, I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but as we're talking, you're just 2 weeks into your book release, right?
Yeah, my publication date was mid-August. And then, so I had a big launch party in San Diego and been running around in LA and Oakland and San Francisco and doing different book events and podcast interviews and all sorts of stuff. So right. I get a little downtime now, but it's been very exciting. It's been so many years leading up to this, and I didn't know what it would really be like. So,
right. Well, I'm glad I caught you before you're just sick to death of talking about the topic.
Yeah. Hopefully I never get there.
Right. So let's just start with this whole concept you've got. What is sexual madness?
So my concept of madness to mindfulness. So sexual madness. And so I'm a sociologist by education. And so I've definitely, been indoctrinated into viewing sex and sexuality and intimacy all through the lens of the gender roles that we were socialized into, literally from birth. From birth, if we're assigned male or female, then immediately folks start treating us differently based on their expectations of us, regardless of who we naturally are or authentically would want to be. And so one of my specialty areas then is female sexuality. And so specifically girls and women raised in American society with this version of what it means to be a good girl, quote unquote, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be sexual, and with all the baggage and shame and embarrassment and, body hatred, frankly, that comes along with all of that. Yeah. And so much, all different aspects, and we get it from our families and school and religion and the government, just to not be comfortable talking about sex, not feel like we have a right to own our sexuality, or have a voice around it, or even the basics of being taught the clitoris in anatomy classes. And
wait. Somebody got taught about the clitoris in an anatomy class?
It was not me. I can tell you that for sure. Growing up in Pennsylvania in a small town, it was not me.
Right.
So all of that stuff. And then, but we're supposed to be then adults in open, loving, long-term relationships, as if we can flip a switch as if by magic, and suddenly be self-expressed, to know our bodies, like our bodies, to share our bodies and sexuality and pleasure with another person. And it just doesn't work that way. And then most women think there's something wrong with them, or that they're broken in some way. So that is all what I'm calling sexual madness.
Okay. So is any part of your study or the book about what it's like for people assigned male at birth? I mean, I'm assuming there's sort of corollary madness.
Sure. And I would say, I mean, the book is focusing on women raising because that is special. So the title is From Madness to Mindfulness, Reinventing Sex for Women. I absolutely do address in parts of it. I mean, and in my work and I travel around and talk to college campuses around sexual consent. In all of my work, I'm always addressing the gender roles, quote unquote, femininity and masculinity that you may have been forced into, and how they keep us all in a box and impact our ability to be intimate and sexually expressed and connecting. So I do talk a little bit in my book about that, to give the context of just how men, how traditional masculinity training literally trains boys out of their emotions and out of their awareness of self, and teaches them that they need to be the sexual initiators and the aggressors, and that's what it is to be a real man, to take what they want and to go for it and to have as much sex as they can, and just be detached from their emotions and the compassionate humanity aspect of it. So those two things, I mean, especially my consent work, those two things go hand in hand for what is a crisis of consent in our country. So, but the book mostly focuses on, the beginning of the book focuses on helping women just know that they're normal, they're okay, they're not broken, there's nothing wrong with them. Because I mean, most women think that there is in many ways with their bodies, with their sexuality. So that's from a sociological perspective, and sharing some really interesting research studies in all different areas. That's the beginning of the book. And then I start teaching mindfulness and what that is, and what, the traditional definitions of mindfulness, and then my kind of version of applied mindfulness and how that can help us with both. I think when people think of mindful sex, they think of, because I help run a group called Sex Positive San Diego. And a couple months ago, I was hosting a mixer for folks to meet each other. And this one guy was saying, he goes, "Oh my gosh, this whole mindful sex thing, this is like, it's like a secret weapon. It almost seems unfair once I have these skills." And I go, "So what does that mean to you?" And because he was very excited about it. And to him, it meant present moment awareness in a sexual encounter. So being very attuned to yourself, your pleasure, being attuned to your partner and their emotion and their pleasure and the energy, and taking things slow and not having an agenda and not having it be goal oriented, which is all true. I mean, that's beautiful. That's what we call good lovemaking, and a good lover. And so I think that's what he was speaking to. And so absolutely the cultivation of mindfulness skills, present moment awareness without judgment, it teaches us that, and how to be attuned to our senses in the moment, and then more attuned to our emotions, and then to our partners, and then to be willing to think outside the box and be creative and not go with our scripted version of sex. Right. So that is one version of it. I would say, that is part of my book. The beginning of the book, though, and definitely the addressing the madness part, is then helping women, because so often we're taught that to have better sex or a better sex life, we need to move towards pleasure and towards excitement. And I say, we need to move towards the pain and the discomfort first, because otherwise you're just, and this is me being blunt from the East Coast. Yeah. I call it putting icing on a shit cupcake, because the foundation is these negative messages about yourself, this shame, this embarrassment, this, even some women are like, if men are trying to be respectful with them and ask for consent, they're like, don't, just go for what you want. Don't be a pussy, and that's because they've so internalized that it's so comfortable to be vulnerable around any sex and asking for what they want. And so much of we embody that in so many different ways. And so teaching women, how do we actually move towards the discomfort of those messages, the emotions attached to them, and literally then the somatic aspects of where they show up in us, in our chest or our solar plexus or our gut or our throat, because that's the stuff that feels so bad, like shame, when you really locate where you feel that and you think it feels horrible. But the process of doing it helps you stay present with it and not, run, numb, distract, hide, get on Instagram and scroll for an hour before you fall asleep, but how to actually stay present with it. And then we could stay present with what we don't want to be with. We gain that emotional resilience. We get to step into our power in new ways. And then we get to be there and be like, oh, okay, I can sit with this. Oh, I can actually move through this. Oh, wait, so who do I actually want to be as a sexual woman? And what does that mean to me? That's how, in sort of a nutshell, a very big nutshell, how I apply sexual mindfulness to sexual madness, specifically kind of in a sociological context.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is the first thing you're mindful to are the pain points, the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt, the whatever, all the difficult stuff first.
Right. And I think often what I found is many people don't know they're there. Women, men, gender, non-binary folks, because I remember I first started talking about sexual shame with clients and all about 10 years ago. And it was not, it's definitely before like Brene Brown, had really mainstreamed our conversations about shame and vulnerability. Yeah. And I found that many people had no connection to that word, even though I could hear them talking. I could feel it in them.
Yeah.
But they didn't have that connection. And so where I start with folks is, what are they not willing to talk about, in a sexual situation? What do they avoid? Whether it's emotional intimacy or asking for what they want, or when their partner brings up, hey, it's been a while since we've had sex. What do you think? And then they do something to avoid that conversation or to blame their partner. Basically, all those trigger points, all those patterned responses. That's where I have folks look at where they're avoiding. And the ways that they avoid, and not beating themselves up for that, and having compassion for themselves, and then teaching them the skills. Then how do you stay present? And then how do you unpack it and find out what is beneath what's going on in those moments of why you do not want to have that conversation, or say no to a sexual encounter, or say yes to a sexual encounter. And
do you have them start in their body, like literally where do they feel it in their core, their gut or their solar plexus, or their heart or whatever? So
I use just a basic triangle of awareness that I gleaned from the mindfulness-based stress reduction course, the 8-week course. It's available all around the country and online. And I was already doing work like that, but then adapted their triangle of, and the top of the triangle is your thoughts, your meaning, your beliefs, your interpretations. Right. One side is emotions, and then the other side is actual bodily sensations.
Right.
So just because those things happen, in half a second. All of that.
And I'm imagining, you can tell I haven't ever done much of a mindfulness practice, but I'm imagining that part of the work is actually integrating those three parts of the triangle, right? Like people may be aware of one or the other, but they may not associate them, right?
Yeah. And it's been interesting. I've had some male clients and specifically ones that are like engineers who are definitely very logical thinking. And I'll have them come in and they'll come in with their partner, and I'll be teaching them this triangle and talking through. And often, and some of the examples I could think of in these cases, like the wife is like, yep, got it. I know all that stuff. I don't like it. And I avoid it. And the husband will be like, I have no idea what you're talking about like feeling these things. And so I'll talk it through some more. I'll give some examples. In those cases, I'll ask the wife, I'm like, do you mind sharing your example so you can lead by example so that he's learning from you? And then, and I'll give some specific homework assignments, and then they'll come back a week or two later. And I can remember this one thing in particular. He was so excited to share with me. He goes, I was on the phone. It was a business call. I did not like the way it was going. And all of a sudden I noticed I felt something in my chest. He goes, I've never noticed that before. So it's so empowering. Like it's there. We just, especially men, we're definitely taught not to pay attention.
And that's some of the madness for them, right? Like this cutoff from their emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then to be in, long-term loving relationships, folks want them to be open and self-expressed and emotionally vulnerable. But then they've taught like that's the worst thing they could possibly do. And they were just never trained in it. So, yeah. And then for all of us, we all have those experiences growing up where, you're 6 years old and you get on the school bus for the first time and somebody trips you and everybody laughs at you and you feel horrible shame, and then whatever you did to make yourself feel better in that moment is basically your go-to for the rest of your life. You know, like you made a joke and then everybody laughed, and now you will make a joke every time you think you might feel shame in any way. You know, mindfulness is about creating space where there wasn't space before, and giving pause without reacting. And so learning how to stay present with it, to be kind to yourself in the process of it, because it feels quite uncomfortable. There's a reason you have some pattern around it, because it just feels so bad. And teaching people slowly how to be comfortable with that discomfort. And I honestly think that is the epitome of empowerment, because when people can't make us feel uncomfortable and we just like own all our own stuff, and not because we're shutting down or compartmentalizing, but because we're just genuinely, we're like, oh yeah, that is my stuff. Oh yeah, oh here, I can feel it here. Oh, here's what's going on for me now. Like, it's just so, we get to be with what really is. I mean, because we both know, like, so often couples, you know, they're having a fight about something and you're like, okay, this is not what you're upset about.
Right.
What's beneath it.
Yeah.
So by practicing this, you know, version of applied mindfulness, they get to pick apart. It gives them a tool to be like, what actually is happening in the moment.
Right.
And that where do you locate it in your body thing is often, part of why I think it's so powerful is because it takes something that's so maybe abstract, it's in its just ability to just sweep you away from the moment, and actually gives you, in a way, something tangible to anchor to in your body, to be like, oh, that's that prickly feeling in my chest, and that like little hollow feeling in my solar plexus that comes up that every time I'm afraid that I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's that thing. Okay. You know, and then I call, having a beer with your fear, sitting down, I mean, minus the beer part, minus the alcohol part of it.
Right.
But, just sitting with your demons and befriending them instead of compartmentalizing them and embracing it as all part of you. And then having compassion for yourself, because that's really hard to do. And most of us have a lifetime of avoiding it.
Well, and the shame gets exponential, it seems like, because we have shame about whatever the thing is, and then we have shame about having shame, like to even go in there and admit the struggle, is shame-inducing for people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's what I think mindfulness is, I mean, it's become quite a mainstream word in a lot of ways, but I think it's quite misunderstood in several ways. One of it, I think, is folks thinks it just means like really concentrating in the moment and being really focused on something. I mean, and that's part of it, but without having the non-judgment part of it, and then I say the actual compassion part of it, then mindfulness without compassion is like a sniper. Somebody super focused on what they're doing, but not compassion for themselves or compassion for the people being impacted. And so that value neutral approach to whatever you're observing inside of you or outside of you is a really important part of it. And I think often people also think mindfulness, just like meditation, that they should just always make you feel great. And they should be always calming, make you happy. And in the long run, absolutely. You have a regular practice, formal practice, informal practices. In the long run, you will absolutely be calmer and happier and more self-expressed. But, from battlefield to battlefield, from day to day, it's about sitting with whatever comes up.
Yeah,
and often that's really, really uncomfortable.
Well, of course it is, because that's what we've been avoiding, right? The stuff that's easy, we feel all the time, or at least have more access to that. So where do people go from, okay, I've identified where I'm feeling this thing in my body, right? I've got that sort of hollow sense in my gut or something, or that prickly feeling. Are there steps to this process, or what's sort of the next awareness?
Well, it could go all different ways. But so one thing is like the triangle, and then I just teach folks to look at all aspects of it. Where do you feel it? What's it mean to you? What's the story you're carrying with you? What are the emotions, and a list of emotions they can pick out? Because often folks might be aware of one emotion, which may be anger or frustration or irritation. But when they get beneath it, it's like, oh, I feel humiliated. Oh, I feel scared. Oh, I feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
And then, accepting it, even if they don't like it, and not judging themselves for it. And then I say, some sort of action, which is something different than whatever your patterned response would be. So if you want to avoid the conversation you're in, if you want to yell at somebody in traffic right now, if you want to, go smoke pot, whatever it is that you would normally do to not be in this, don't do that, or just prolong doing it, frankly, because you might still go smoke pot in 10 minutes, but before you would have done it in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And so you've just trained yourself to sit for, 9 minutes and 30 seconds longer with this discomfort. And often it's really helpful to journal on it and just, write it down, just to feel it and be in it. And then make sure that you are, having kind thoughts for yourself and to be like, hey, I'm proud of myself for doing this. This is really hard. I'm grateful for myself that I'm on this personal growth journey. Because otherwise just sitting in the negative, is pretty tough. And so there has to be that kindness towards self. There's also, if you're in a conversation with a partner, I teach folks, or if they feel like there's a conversation that needs to be had that they don't know how to start, to grab the triangle and be like, okay, here's what's going on for me. Like there's something going on between us. So I call it part of the process of just calling out what is. And often people, they don't know where to start the conversation. Right, they feel stuck. They have no idea what to do. So I say, just pull the triangle out and start there. And so stay. Okay, you start at the thoughts part. You're like, I'm stuck. and I feel a little scared of bringing up this conversation. Oh, and when I said that, I felt a little prickle, in my chest, and it went up to my neck a little bit. And I'm afraid that this conversation isn't going to go well. And I think that I don't really have the skills for this. And I think that maybe you're just disappointed in me, and then it's just a calling out what is.
Yeah.
And then asking your partner to do the same, because you've just taken something that was a wedge between you, and you've just brought yourself together in vulnerability and authenticity and taken your walls down.
Right. And this totally lines up with what I do with clients all the time.
Yeah.
And it's also very different to just describe what's going on for you across the triangle than to make it about your partner or their behavior or to project it on them. And so those conversations go better when it's like, hey, I'm feeling this. I've got this sensation. This are my thoughts. Like, this is all me. It's not you.
Right. And I tell people, because sometimes they're like, I'm like, so how'd the triangle go for you? And they're like, not so good. And I'm like, well, how'd you use it? And be like, well, she seemed in a pissy mood. So I brought the triangle up to her and said, here, use the triangle. And I was like, yeah, I bet that didn't go over so well.
Right. Or here, let me tell you what you're thinking and feeling.
Yeah. Right.
Obviously, you're pissed off and you're,
Right. And the thing is, you could start in that same place and just say, my perception of you is that you're pissed off. Right. I'm afraid it's because I did this thing. Yeah. I'm not sure. So it's this, you say the same things, but you just own it, that you're like, I have no idea if this is the truth or your truth, but this is my truth.
Right. It's interesting. I like this idea of the triangle too, because I talk all the time to clients about how important it is to distinguish between feelings and thoughts in their communication.
And it's so hard to do.
It is so hard because our culture is always like, hey, I feel like this, I feel like that. And those aren't feelings, right?
I feel like you're being a jerk right now.
Right, exactly.
So that's an interpretation. That would be the top of the triangle.
but I don't have them use the body sensations all the time. And it's a nice reminder to me to think, wait, let's bring in all 3 points.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy Is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com.
And there's another, because you were asking them, what different steps are. There's another thing I talk about in my book. So Pema Chodron is like a Buddhist nun and mindfulness teacher. And I think her books and all her teachings are just fantastic.
Yeah.
She's very compassionate in her approach and very accessible. And, and she talks about sometimes even just completely dropping the story and dropping in any way what you can, your interpretations of it, and just being with the raw sensations.
Yeah.
And in one of her books, she argues that that if we really do that often just stay with those raw sensations where they are, without any meaning attached to it, without the story attached to he left me and he's a jerk, or woe is me, or nobody understands me, or why is this always, or, whatever the story is, drop all of it and be with those sensations and get detailed with them, that often they'll pass through in about 90 seconds or so. Mm. And that's but it's really hard even for 90 seconds to stay that present with those things without our thoughts taking us off. And which is fine, because then you just acknowledge that you were distracted and choose to bring yourself back to that moment. And that's just what the mindfulness practice is over and over again. But it's really, and I know having started practicing mindfulness over 15 years ago, I'll notice it. For some reason, there's a specific drive when I'm coming home. Maybe it's coming home from events or something, but I'll notice when I'm just, not far away from my home and I'm driving back in my beach town and whatever. And maybe it's because I've had about 15, 20 minutes to process whatever I came from. And then I may be left with something. And then, so there's this strip of road I have very much associated in my head with all right, let's just breathe with this. Let's just be with this. Be like, ooh, that's a prickly. Oh, okay, I definitely feel vulnerable about that. Or, oh, I could tell I was on my second glass of wine and I probably shouldn't have said that thing, and I sit with it and I breathe into it. And then I do it. And I have the thought of just being kind to myself, because it's emotional suffering in that moment, and having compassion for myself. And then 5 minutes later, I'm home and I was like, oh shit, look at that. It just moved through me. Something that literally could have taken a week before.
Wow.
Or that I would have sat with days, that I would have woken up in the morning with it. And now, just because I've been doing it for so long, I'm like, and so it's not that you don't feel the ickiness of things. Right. I've changed my relationship to them because I really move towards them. I don't resist the discomfort. If I drop the story and I'm just with those raw sensations, and it's super uncomfortable, but it really works. But it takes practice. It's like anything else. It's a skill that takes practice. Yeah.
So what are the kinds of sexual problems that you would see related to madness that then can be helped or alleviated by mindfulness? Let's make this a little practical if we can.
Yeah. So, one of my specialty areas is women in long-term relationships who struggle with low desire. Mm-hmm. And so we don't understand desire very well. The physiology behind it, the endocrine system, all of it. We know it when it's there and it feels amazing and sexual experiences feel easy. But once it's not there naturally, we have no skills or understanding of what to do with it. And I don't think, even our research is, what they tried for years there's still always pills trying to come out, say that they're new, the female Viagra, which is not even about desire anyway. That would be about arousal. So it's just not an easy thing to deal with. And so I think in all different ways, mindfulness is helpful with that. So first of all, for women that, maybe after the initial neurochemical excitement of a relationship, they find that their desire drops, even though they're with a partner that they really love and are very attracted to, and it's respectful and it's communicative, but they just don't feel much anymore. And so one place to look at, are there places that they're carrying body shame, that they've inherited from society? And so that would be a place to look through the mindful lens of what messages have you been taught? Where, what did you inherit from society about how you judge your body and view yourself, especially if you've gone through pregnancy and childbirth. And so that could be a way of shame, and then using mindfulness to work through that. Embarrassment about sexual topics, because I find sometimes that religious shame can surface maybe more so a few years in, when the neurochemicals kind of wear off, and then they are left they don't know how to initiate sex or ask for their needs. Or they feel embarrassed about that, or they got used to, needing a few glasses of wine to relax, but now they're trying to eat healthier and go to yoga and not have wine. And now they don't know how to access their desire. And that could be, so that could be embarrassment and discomfort. So again, it's teaching women how to be with the awkwardness of asking for their needs or sitting with the ambiguity of, and I know you've talked to Emily Nagoski and her just fantastic book, Come As You Are. It's one of my favorite books. And how, and this is something that is always, every time I have an audience of women, they are shocked by this concept of, what is it to move towards having sexual activity and letting your body get aroused.
Right.
And then let the desire come from that, which we are never taught that that's a normal thing.
Right. I talk about that all day long with couples. It's just so important. So many people's desire works like that.
And I know because I, was indoctrinated into sociology and feminist beliefs. And so we're trained that then you never do anything sexual if you don't want to.
Right.
Body doesn't want to. And so I remember, 12 years ago or something when I was really diving into my private practice and being like, yeah, that's not going to work for most of these couples. Like, so how do we do it in a way that they don't feel violated or they're not doing it because they feel obligated? And how do they do it in a way that they feel empowered and that they teamwork approach with their partner,
right?
That they're communicating through all of it, and that they take the leap of faith that their body can kick in, but then they also trust and have it set up with their partner that it's okay if they stop the encounter if their body doesn't kick in.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you say, people, somewhere between 5% of the time and 95%, the engine's going to turn over, but not the rest, and that's got to be okay.
Yeah. And that's often because, the higher desire person is like, oh, yay, finally, we're doing something. And the low desire person then doesn't want to disappoint them or let them go. And then they'll go through an encounter where their body's not really turned on and then they feel pain. And then that becomes a whole cycle then that they get in. So, for so many different reasons, like, all of those topics around desire, knowing your body, speaking your truth, initiating sex, getting over embarrassment and shame, the consent piece and finding your voice in that, being able to have awkward sexual conversations, all of those things are ways that because often why we most avoid those things, or at least the conversations about it, is because it physiologically feels awkward. We don't want to go to that place. And so we will avoid it no matter what.
Wow.
And so even just sitting and taking the time to journal and sit with all of that. So every chapter in my book ends with worksheets where you actually get to answer questions and write things in. And then an action item where you get to start putting this into action. Because you can read about mindfulness, but you're not going to learn it without practicing it. And so just learning, and so teaching us, so doing it on our own before we have that conversation with a partner can help train us to be like, oh yeah, this feels bad, but like I'm in it right now and like, I'm okay. I didn't die.
Yeah.
And now that I wrote it down, I can feel, like, for example, I have a good friend of mine and she was having a relationship problem and she did not know how to address it without, getting really angry. And so I texted her all these different, writing prompts. And I just saw her recently. And that's what she said. She goes, oh my God, that was so helpful. And I got so in touch with what was really beneath my anger and really owning that. And then I was able then to approach him in a much calmer way and also a very clear way of what was going on. So it just, it helps us pinpoint how we move towards the discomfort.
Right.
And then we learn the skills of how do we stay with that. And then it's such a paradigm shift in the energy that we bring to difficult conversations. So, yeah.
Is there anything else? You mentioned, I think you said applied mindfulness, right? Or
that's what I call.
I didn't know if there was any other elements of that we haven't already talked about, or.
I mean, it applies to. Basically, it applies to everything in life. But since my specialty area is female sexual empowerment and desire and consent, that's where I most teach. How do we apply it? So, because I think part of why I called it applied mindfulness is that I've just been, I live in San Diego, which is a very holistic town. and a lot of new age stuff and some woo-woo stuff. But folks that are more open-minded to these topics, but except in like the Tantra community, and they have their own, version of spiritual sexuality and how they do things. And there is a lot of beauty in that. But otherwise, sex is still relegated to its own category. Yeah. Like, when I my publisher and I with the book, we were trying so hard to find, we had so many of my great colleagues did advance endorsements for the book, which was lovely. We were just trying to find one person in the mindfulness or spirituality community that would endorse it. And I've got, because I run in those circles, and I've got friends that run organizations. It was so funny. One of my friends, she went to another one we know, and she's like, "Hey, do you know anybody that's, in the compassion or mindfulness realm that is, publicly sex positive?" and the one was like, "You mean besides Dr. Jenn?" And my friend was like, "Yeah, no, that's exactly who I'm asking for here." Right. And we couldn't find that because most people don't want to touch sex still, literally. It's as if it dirties them or sullies their work or brings them negative attention. And I was like, how are we still not integrating sexuality and our sexual well-being into the big picture of our spiritual and our physical and our mental and our emotional and social well-being? It's a part of all of those things. It's such a foundational level, but it's still, relegated to something sort of, dirty in the corner. Right. And so that's been part of my motivation for all of these years, to be integrating spirituality and sexuality, and that there's nothing shameful about that, and shining a bright light on all of it. Yeah. So it's been a little of a frustrating process still, but I'm hoping, I'm hoping that folks see my approach, and then that's why I call it applied, because this isn't a meditation book. Right. I speak about in the mindfulness chapter, I talk about, formal meditation practice, and, and I have a paragraph or two on that, and I give some suggestions around that. But in general, this is all what I call informal practices of where we really, because I joke, we all know somebody that meditates every day for an hour, but they're still an asshole, So because they don't know, they maybe use meditation as escape, or they don't know how to apply it to the actual difficulty of intimacy and communication and your needs and raising kids and like all of these things that just hook us, that we're so reactive around, that are such deeply connected to our sense of self-worth and our value and our importance, but so attached to shame and lessons that it's inappropriate and judgment of self and others. So anyway, so that's why I'm referring to it as an applied mindfulness book, because then I teach it, and then I teach how do we apply this to having difficult conversations, and how do we apply this to gratitude in our relationships, and how do we apply this to sex and passion and sexual difficulties, and then how do we apply it to body image? Right. And then I have a whole chapter. So I wrote the brunt of this several years ago, and then it was the process of editing it and finding a publisher and all of that. And I have a chapter called Our Responsibility, of how do we stop passing this on to younger generations of women? Yeah. And teaching how do we be responsible and how we're showing up? How do we, recognize it's okay to compliment a girl on her appearance, but make sure that, we have a 5-to-1 ratio of complimenting her on her intelligence or her athletic skills or how kind she is or being of service or what a good friend she is or all these other her intelligence, all these other things that give her a much greater depth of self-worth and meaning and value, rather than her attractiveness and appearance to others. Yeah. And it's funny because when I wrote the chapter a few years ago, I was like, I don't know how well this is going to be received. And then Me Too happened, and then Trump happened, and now I'm like, oh my God, this I'm so timely. Proud of this chapter. Yeah, it really, it's quite timely. So, yeah.
So tell people where they can get the book, where they can learn more about you, connect with you, and what you might be offering.
Yeah. So again, the title is From Madness to Mindfulness. The easiest place is on Amazon, but it's on Barnes & Noble online too. It's in, I know the Good Vibrations and Babeland sex toy stores are carrying it. Actually, I just saw on Instagram, like before we got on the call, somebody, I think she's up in Canada actually. And she did and her niece was an intern of mine. And I actually thank her in the acknowledgments page. And so this woman went into her Barnes and Noble and found my book on the shelf there, which is like, that's a moment of pride for me. I'm like, oh my God, my book is in a Barnes and Noble, like on a shelf there. Like, so I gotta go find a Barnes and Noble and see if it's here in San Diego just for the joy of that. So, but I mean, obviously online is the easiest place to find it. And then my website, which it's my hub for everything. Dr. Jenn's Den, DrJennsDen. And I have, 2 TEDx talks on there. I have a rather personal consent violation video that I share, and applying compassion to myself and talking about gender roles and how that's relevant and how I think the situation happened. Yeah. And then, I've got a YouTube channel, In the Den with Dr. Jenn, with over 220 free videos on there. I've been at the online thing for a while, so I've got a lot out there.
There's a backlog of stuff that people can read or listen to if they want to. So
there is a lot there, that's for sure.
But I'll have all these links in the show notes too, so
awesome.
It'll be available to people. So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for your great questions. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.